Bismillah walhamdulillah wa salatu wa salamu ala rasulillah wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam. Rabbi shrah li sadri wa yassir li amri wahlul 'uqdatin min lisani yafqahu qawli. Amma ba'd, assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. So today, as is the norm of the ulama before they start a book, we'll be given the biography of Imam an-nawawi rahmatullahi alayh. So his full name is Muhyiddin. His kunya is Abu Zakaria. So Abu Zakaria Muhyiddin Yahya ibn Sharaf ibn Murri ibn Hassan ibn Muhammad ibn Jum'ah ibn Hizam ibn Hizami an-Nawawi. And an-Nawawi is in reference to where he was born in Nawa, which is in present day Syria. He was born in the year 631 after Hijrah. And his town is in the south of the capital of Syria today, which is known as Damascus. And he belonged to a family of taqwa, and his father, subhanAllah, was a very simple man. And there was one thing that stood out about them, as we said, that they were a family of taqwa. He used to command all the family members to avoid consuming anything which is haram. And as we know, consuming that which is from haram sources is a form of what? Is a form of dua not being answered. So this act, as though it may appear simple on the surface, the reality is it's very great, because what it affects is great, and that is your invocation between you and Allah Tabarak wa Ta'ala being answered. As for his upbringing, when he was 10 years of age, he began his life in talab al-ilm, or his life in seeking knowledge. And how can this not be the case when his family, as we said, was one of taqwa? He first began with his memorization of the Noble Quran, and then he also began to study fiqh with some of the local scholars of his hometown. On one occasion, a sheikh by the name of Yasin ibn Yusuf al-Marakishi, and Marrakesh is a town in present day Morocco. He saw the other children trying to force Imam Nawawi to play, and Imam al-Nawawi was persistent on fleeing from them, as he was crying from this in order to revise his lessons. Upon this, the sheikh went to his father and advised him to make his son devoted entirely to seeking Islamic knowledge. So we say, subhanAllah, that Imam al-Nawawi, even from this young tender age, he was even fleeing from that which is innocent, which is playing with the other children. And this shows the importance that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala instilled in his heart with respects to this Islamic knowledge. And as the ulama say, إذا أعطيت العلم كلك أعطاك نصفه. That if you gave Islamic knowledge all of yourself, it will give you half, meaning that the process in order to attain it requires great sacrifice. And even with that great sacrifice, you will not attain all of it, because verily it is vast. Then upon witnessing this, his teacher informed his father to make sure that he's devoted only to Islamic knowledge. And subhanAllah, you find that these turning points, they happen a lot in the lives of our scholars, rahmatullah alayhim. It could be just a compliment, like what happened in the case of Imam al-Dhahabi rahimahullah. He saw the handwriting, or his teacher saw the handwriting of Imam al-Dhahabi, and he said to his father that his handwriting resembles the handwriting of the muhaddithin. And from that, it was that turning point that probably led Imam al-Dhahabi rahimahullah to take on the path of learning hadith. And then you find many other occasions as well, such as Shaykh al-Islam Ibn Taymiyyah, such as Imam al-Bukhari rahmatullahi alayhim ajma'een. You find that they had some sort of turning point which led them to, or encouraged them to, devote themselves entirely for seeking the Islamic knowledge, which is one of the most, or the most noble form of knowledge in the earth. In the year of 649, his father took him to Damascus in order for his son to further his studies in the madrasa of Darul Hadith. Then in the year of 651, he performed Hajj with his father. Then upon his return to Damascus, he began the frequent the lessons of the scholars therein up until he attained the level that he attained. And it's said about Imam an-Nawawi rahimahullah, and this is indicative of the tawfiq that Allah tabarak wa ta'ala gave. It said that after him becoming so busy with seeking Islamic knowledge, it said that he tried to pursue something else which was still honorable. Some say it was seeking a secular science or an honorable secular science such as medicine, to become a doctor. He said that subhanAllah, when he attempted, he found himself uneasy and his heart becoming blackened. And then he said the only way that was lifted from him is when he returned to be frequent with seeking Islamic knowledge. And we're going to see as well how much time he used to dedicate as well with his pursuit of Islamic knowledge. But before we get to that, let us get an idea of his manners and his qualities, rahmatullah alayh. The authors of biographies, they unanimously agreed that Imam an-Nawawi was a leader in asceticism, a role model in piety, and unparalleled in advising rulers, enjoining good and forbidding evil. One of his most important qualities is asceticism and piety, and it is narrated that he was asked why he did not get married, and he simply said, "I forgot." And this is due to his great work in acquiring knowledge and spreading it. So asceticism, for those who don't know, or it's a new term for them, means that they had very little or no desire in worldly things, even that which was mubah, permissible. Why? Because they were that dedicated to getting to their akhirah. Not because they saw these things as haram, but they saw them as a distraction. And that's only one indication of how busy Imam an-Nawawi rahimahullah was with Islamic knowledge. Not because he didn't want or have the desire, because at the end of the day he's a man, but rather Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala made him so absorbed into what he was seeking that he forgot about marriage. Just to show you, subhanallah, the level of this great Imam. Also, we just read as well that he was known to advise the rulers as well. And there's a famous story which occurred between him and one of the kings of his times, or one of the sultans of his times, Al-Zahir Baybars, from the Mamalik. To sum up the long story, in the time of Al-Zahir, they were facing conflict with the Tatar, the descendants of Genghis Khan. And Al-Zahir Baybars said that in the treasury there's not enough money in order to fund the armies. So he started to impose tax upon the merchants. In order for what? In order to have concerts, parties? No. In order for something noble, to fund the army to defend the Muslims. But he said that he's taking from the merchants, and Imam an-Nawawi, despite other scholars of his time signing and allowing for this to occur, he wasn't easy with it, and he wasn't of those who signed in order to allow it. So this summoned the attention of the Sultan, and therefore he was summoned to him, and he asked him, "O Imam, why is it that you are objective to this fatwa?" And he says to the Sultan, he says, "Because you have over 100 slaves, and they have they have gold adornments. And then in addition to that, you have female slaves who also have an abundant amount of jewelry." He said, "Begin with yourself. Take this gold, donate it to the army, and then I will conform." And the Sultan didn't like this, so he exiled Imam an-Nawawi rahmatullah alayh. And then all of the fuqaha who recognized the fadl, the virtue of Imam an-Nawawi said, "Do you know who you have exiled?" They said, "You've exiled one of the greatest fuqaha." And then upon this, the Sultan called for him to come back. But Imam an-Nawawi rahimahullah returned back to his hometown, and then after that the Sultan passed away. He passed away. So this shows you that this great Imam, not only was he someone fierce in advising the rulers and not fearing the blamer blamers, Not only did he not be distracted and have desire for the worldly things which are even mubah, but it shows you that he combined between two great things: ilm, knowledge, and amal, and action. And from among the indications of that is his life, as we're seeing. So if he was someone that just kept his knowledge textual, he could have conformed and he could have signed like the other scholars of his time. But no, Imam an-Nawawi rahimahullah, as we said, was someone who combined between knowledge and action, and therefore it couldn't sit well with him that he's going to allow tax to be imposed even though it's for a noble purpose. He couldn't allow this to be the case while the Sultan had abundant wealth that he could have put towards the army. In the life of Imam an-Nawawi rahimahullah, there are also other many examples that indicate extreme piety. He would not accept gifts from anyone except from his parents and relatives. His mother would send him a shirt and the likes to wear it, and his father would send him something to eat, and he would sleep in his room in which he lived from the day he arrived in Damascus in the Rawahiyya school, and he did not want anything beyond that. So subhanallah, perhaps the reason was behind this is that Imam an-Nawawi rahimahullah, he wanted to be fully reliant upon Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And you find this is the norm with a lot of the scholars. Why? Because when you start to accept gifts, when you start to accept somewhat of a wage, you could find yourself being in a position where you're not going to, not all the time, but you could find it a lot of the time, you're not going to be in a position to uphold or bring that person to account that gives you gifts. So Imam an-Nawawi, perhaps he wanted to avoid that and live this life so it can make him only reliant upon Allah tabarak wa ta'ala, and also very quick to stand for the truth. Because you find that even in our time today, this is one of the biggest barriers between a scholar, a shaykh, and also speaking the truth. Why? Because they're reliant upon the wage that they're receiving, either from a ruler or a committee that has bad intentions, and so forth. So we see that what stands out about our Salaf is that they were only reliant upon Allah tabarak wa ta'ala, and when it came to means of attaining wealth, they were, after their reliance upon Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, they were self-sufficient. And when I say self-sufficient, I don't mean that they never had any need for Allah tabarak wa ta'ala. Kalla, no, I don't mean that. Rather, they had their reliance upon Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, but they only sought income from means where it's not going to make them compromise with talking the truth and standing for the truth. Imam an-Nawawi rahimahullah had an endless thirst for knowledge. He used to read 12 lessons daily and wrote commentaries on every lesson. So he would attend 12 lessons a day and he would write. So it shows, subhanAllah, the himma, the eagerness and the determination of this great scholar. Sometimes we'll attend 1, 3, max 5, and we've had it. But this was his norm daily. And this is in addition to probably what else he done at home, from his worldly affairs to his own ibadah, and also compiling and writing his own works as well, rahmatullah alayh. And we're going to see as well, he lived a very short life as well. Whatever books he read, he would write marginal notes and explanations on each book. His intelligence, hard work, love, devotion and absorption in his studies amazed his teachers, and they became fond of him and began to praise and admire him. Allah had also conferred upon him the gift of fast memorization and depth of thought. Imam an-Nawawi made full benefits of his qualities and potentialities and earned the highest degree of honor in his time. So we see here that perhaps as well, wallahu alam, that this was further an honor to him through his father by only consuming that which is halal. And when you consume that which is haram, it starts to have a lot of an effect. And even the scholars, they say even an effect on your outer health, even an effect on your intellect and so forth. So the foundation was led by his simple father, rahmatullah alayh. And therefore Allah tabarak wa ta'ala continued to honor him, in his pursuit. He continued to honor him with fast memorization, as we read, in-depth thought, and critical analyzation. From among his mashayikh were the following. He says, during his time in Damascus, he studied from more than 20 teachers who were regarded as masters and authorities of their subject. So each of these teachers were regarded as masters in their field, whether it be Arabic grammar, whether it be fiqh, whether it be other forms of sciences such as Quran, whether it be tafsir and so forth. Each of these 20 teachers were masters in what they taught. An-Nawawi rahimahullah studied in Damascus hadith, Islamic jurisprudence, its principles, syntax, and etymology. These are related to grammar, such as nahu and sarf. His teachers included the following: Abu Ibrahim Ishaq ibn Ahmad al-Maghribi, Abu Muhammad Abdul Rahman ibn Ibrahim al-Fazari, Radiyuddin Abu Ishaq Ibrahim ibn Abu Hafs Umar ibn Mudar al-Mudari, Abu Ishaq Ibrahim ibn Isa al-Muradi, Abu al-Baqa Khalid ibn Yusuf al-Nabulsi, Abu al-Abbas Ahmad ibn Salim al-Misri, Abu Abdullah al-Jiyani, Abdul Fath Umar ibn Bandar, Abu Muhammad al-Tanuhi, Sharafuddin Abdul Aziz ibn Muhammad al-Ansari, Abdul Faraj Abdul Rahman ibn Muhammad ibn Ahmad al-Maqdisi, Abdul Fadail Sallar ibn al-Hasan al-Arbali, and many more. Then, as we said, that this great Imam, after attaining knowledge and this being his norm, then also attained imama in the religion, a high status in the religion, and now he was able to teach. And from among his students were the following: his servant, the scholar Aliuddin Abu al-Hasan Ali ibn Ibrahim ibn Dawood al-Damashqi, known as Ibn al-Attar. And this was the one who, rahmatullah alayh, the one who was known to frequent with the Shaykh majority of his life and majority of his time. From among them was As-Sadr, the virtuous president, Abu al-Abbas Ahmad ibn Ibrahim ibn Mus'ab, Ash-Shams Muhammad ibn Abi Bakr ibn Ibrahim ibn Abdul Rahman ibn Naqib. And he was the last of the notables of the companions of an-Nawawi. Al-Badr Muhammad ibn Ibrahim ibn Sa'dallah ibn Jama'ah. The well-established jurist Abu al-Abbas Ahmad al-Tarir al-Wasiti, also known as al-Khallal, Ismail ibn Ibrahim ibn Salim ibn al-Khabbaz, Shihabuddin Abu Hafs Umar ibn Kathir, the father of the muhaddith and historian Abil Fida ibn Kathir, the one who he's the father of the Mufassir, who we refer back to his tafsir up until this day, Tafsir ibn Kathir. Al-Ala Ali ibn Ayyub ibn Mansur al-Maqdisi, who hand wrote Al-Minhaj directly, which is one of his books, directly from Imam an-Nawawi. And lastly, Abu al-Faraj Abdul Rahman ibn Muhammad ibn Abdul Hamid ibn Abdul Hadi al-Maqdisi. So these are the notables from among his students. Now let us get an insight to what the scholars said of words of praise with respect to Imam an-Nawawi rahmatullah alayhi. Ibn al-Attar, who is his student, as we said, our Shaykh rahimahullah mentioned to me that he would not waste any time of the day or of the night, not even while traveling. He perpetuated in this state for 6 years. Then he began to write, teach, counsel people, and speak the truth. I say, despite his struggle against his soul, he acted upon the finer points of caution, was vigilant, purified his soul of evil inclinations, and destroyed his ulterior motives. He would also memorize hadiths with the issues to which they pertained and their narrators. So he would memorize the hadith, the text. Then he would memorize the fiqh concerning the hadith. Then we also memorize the sanad, the chain of the hadith. And also what alludes and what is entailed with knowing this as well. So not just the names of the narrators, but their grades and so forth, of which were sahih and of which were defective. Furthermore, he was the leading scholar in knowledge of the Shafi'i madhab. Shaykh Ibn Farah was once explaining what a shaykh of hadith is, when he suddenly said, and this is another shaykh who praised Imam an-Nawawi, he said, Shaykh Muhyiddin obtained 3 distinctions, which if a person possesses one of them, people should travel to learn from them: knowledge, asceticism, and commanding the good and forbidding the evil. Rahmatullah alayh. As for his works, we see that, subhanallah, and we're gonna as well see how old he was when he passed away, rahmatullah alayh. We're gonna see how Allah tabarak wa ta'ala put barakah in his time and works, because in his short age he was able to compile and author the following books. And subhanallah, from among the blessings that Allah tabarak wa ta'ala bestowed upon this great Imam was that you will not find the masjid, Islamic center, Islamic library, and even majority of Muslim homes except that they contain a work of Imam an-Nawawi rahmatullah alayh. From among the works that he was able to do in his short life was the compilation of Riyadh al-Salihin. Also, he was able to compile the explanation of Sahih Muslim, which is also known as Al-Minhaj. He was also able to explain Sunan Abi Dawood, and Allahu Alam if this has been printed or not. Also in fiqh, because as we said, he was one of the leading scholars of the Shafi'i madhab, he authored Kitab al-Rawdah, and then he summarized this book, and this summarized version is known more, and that is Minhaj al-Talibin, Minhaj al-Talibin in fiqh al-Shafi'i. Then he also has a book in linguistics called Tahdhib al-Asma' wa Sifat. From among the most famous of his works is the work that we're going to be studying, Al-Arba'un an-Nawawiyya, the 40 hadith of Imam an-Nawawi. From among his works also is Mukhtasar al-Tirmidhi. So he summarized Sunan al-Tirmidhi. Allahu Alam if that is printed as well. Also Tabaqat al-Shafi'iyya. Also Muhimmatul Ahkam in fiqh. Al-Adhkar, which is printed. This is a book pertaining to invocations. This is also printed as well, At-Tibyan fi Adab Hamalat al-Quran. And this book is a must for learning the adab of talib al-ilm, but more in particular the memorizer of Quran. Also from among his works is Al-Irshad wa Taqrib fi Ulum al-Hadith, and many more as well. But these are some of the most famous of his works, rahmatullah alayh. As for his explanation of Sharh Sahih Muslim, is a standard textbook for the study of hadith, while Minhaj al-Talibin is used for the study of fiqh. Rather, it is this book in the Shafi'i madhab that whoever memorizes it is now able to be considered a mufti in the madhab of Imam al-Shafi'i rahmatullah alayh. As for his death, after leading a life of piety, righteousness, simplicity and knowledge, which lasted over 20 years, he returned to his hometown of Nawa, and soon after he fell ill and died in the year 676 AH, and he was 45 years old. 45 years old. So, subhanallah, really his time spent in knowledge. Obviously he led a life of tarbiyah and taqwa from a young age, but being immersed in knowledge in adulthood was roughly a little bit over 20 years. 20 years, and he was able to compile works which are still benefited from today, and no one has been able to compile the amount of works in this short time like Imam an-Nawawi has, rahmatullahi alayh. And that is a bit concerning his life. Based on my research, what I found from notable scholars, I found that concerning this topic in particular, they are divided into two. The most common stance concerning Imam an-Nawawi rahimahullah is that we don't say he was an Ash'ari, but rather there were some topics pertaining to creed where he was upon the way of the Ash'ari. And what's the difference between the two? You find those who were known to be Ash'ari, when they authored works, they would do so in order to give victory to their creed. Imam an-Nawawi rahimahullah was not like this, like the likes of Tajuddin al-Subki, al-Razi and so forth. He wasn't of these likes. But there were errors that occurred because he took the view, and not in all situations, but he took the view of the Ash'ari. But he also took the views of Ahl Sunnah wal Jama'ah, the Salaf as well. And the Standing Committee, Al-Lajna Ad-Da'ima, they say that in summary concerning the likes of Imam an-Nawawi, Imam Ibn Hajar, Al-Baqilani, Ibn al-Jawzi, rahimahumullah, that whatever they erred in, meaning whatever they agreed with the Ash'ari in, then this is an error. They fell into this due to making mistaken interpretation. And whatever they agreed with the Salaf in, then in these aspects, they're from Ahl Sunnah wal Jama'ah. And this is the more common view. And if you return back to his explanation of Sahih Muslim, you'll find that when he talks about the Quran, he affirms that as being the direct speech of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So you see that he goes against the view of the Ash'ari, which shows what? Which shows that what he fell into wasn't in all affairs based on this view. And what I found as well is that when he compiled his explanation of Sahih Muslim, it wasn't all entirely from his words, but rather he would summarize from the works of in the works of those who came before him who explained Sahih Muslim, such as Qadi Iyad and Imam al-Marizi, who were from the Ash'ari. So whatever he quoted from them was in reality their views. And this was the case, why? Because the Aqidah that had most influence and was predominant in his time was the Aqidah of the Ash'ari. But as we said, based on that view, he didn't aid the madhab like other Ash'ari who were more common, but rather in some aspects, due to the interpretation he took, he erred, but not in all aspects of creed he agreed with them. But rather there are also aspects where he held the view of Ahl Sunnah wal Jama'ah, and whatever he held the view of Ahl Sunnah wal Jama'ah in, then we hold him from Ahl Sunnah wal Jama'ah in that aspect. And that's the first view in summary. The second view is, and this was also a surprise to me as well, is that later on in his life he retracted and came to the madhab of the Salaf. And it is said that he authored a book called Juz fi i'tiqad as-Salaf fi al-hurufi wal-aswat, a chapter in the belief of the Salaf concerning letters and voices, meaning this was a refutation of him to the Ash'ari in their likes with respects to what they say about the attribute of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's speech. And they say that, and this group of scholars, from among them is Shaykh Salih al-Usaymi hafidhahullah, he says that he holds this view, and there are only 3 original copies of this book in the world. So Allahu Alam if it's been printed, I haven't searched that, but original copies there were only 3. And as we said, he lived a short life. So towards the end of his life, he wanted to show what he was upon of retracting that which was in line with the Ash'ari. And from among what aids this is that his dedicated student Ibn al-Attar also has a treatise in Aqidah, which is also in line with the madhab of the Salaf. And it also shows that if anyone was going to retract his return back to the madhab of the Salaf, it would have been Ibn al-Attar, but we don't know of any refutation of this claim as well. And this is why Shaykh Salih al-Usaymi says that he supports this view. However, in summary, whatever view we take, if we take the first view, then he's pardoned for what error he fell into, and you can still benefit from him whilst being cautious of what he erred in. And he is not alone in this as well, rahmatullahi alayh. And if we take the second view, then this is also good and virtuous. But whatever view we take, we shouldn't let this be preventative of us benefiting from the works of Imam an-Nawawi, rahmatullahi ta'ala alayh. Inshallah that answers. Now, before the adhan, we move on quickly to the methodology he used in the compiling of Arba'een an-Nawawiyah. So there is no doubt that Imam an-Nawawi's 40 hadith collection is without a doubt one of the most important works in the genre of hadith till this day. So it's the book that when the student of knowledge wants to start with in hadith, the scholars direct him to it. And not just the beginner, but also the one who is firmly grounded in knowledge, because there is still something that he can benefit and add to what he already has. Through reading the introduction of this great Imam for his astonishing work, we are able to grasp his methodology used in compiling it. Here we'll divide the introduction into important points in order to present the methodology in an easy manner. So we're going to show his methodology in point form. Firstly, the number of hadiths is 42, and some versions go up to 50. Where Imam an-Nawawi rahimahullah stopped was 42. And some might be saying, okay, then why is it called 40? This is because the Arab, they round off to the nearest 10. They round off to the nearest 10. So the nearest 10 to 42 is 40. However, some other editions have 50 hadith, and the extra 8 were added by the great Imam Ibn Rajab al-Hanbali, who also has one of the best explanations of the 40 hadith, which is known as Jami' al-Ulum wal-Hikam. So that's concerning the number of these hadith. As for the reason of compilation, Imam an-Nawawi rahimahullah begins by mentioning the reason behind his enthusiasm to compile this collection, which is a narration attributed to the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. The hadith states that anyone who memorizes 40 hadiths from the hadiths of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, Allah will resurrect him among the scholars. Imam an-Nawawi, however, also clearly mentions that this hadith is weak. Although it is weak, this became a custom among many other scholars to implement it. So the concept of 40 is based on this weak hadith. But this weak hadith, when we talked about in mustalah, that from among the madhahib, from among the views of the ulama of hadith, is that we can act upon a weak hadith if it has an established origin. And he's going to mention the established origin. So he's going to mention that a bit later. But in summary, this was his main motivation to compile 40. So the number of 40 became a custom, but the hadith which mentions 40 in itself is weak. However, that weak hadith, it can be referenced to an established asl, an established fundamental in the religion, which is when the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam says, نَضَّرَ اللَّهُ إِمْرَأً سَمِعَ مَقَالَتِي فَوَعِيَهَا فَأَدَّاهَا كَمَا سَمِعَهَا. He says, sallallahu alayhi wasallam, may Allah illuminate a man who hears my statement, understands it, then spreads it. So this is the asl, this is the origin that the spreading of 40 would go back to. So we understand from this that Imam an-Nawawi rahimahullah saw that it's allowed to act upon the weak hadith that has an established origin in the Sharia. From among the common collections of the 40 ahadith, besides this one, is the 40 hadith of encouraging jihad by Ali ibn al-Hasan ibn Hibatullah, Abu al-Qasim ibn Asakir. Also the 40 hadith of rulings by Zakiyuddin Abu Muhammad Abdul Azim ibn Abdul Qawi al-Mundhiri. Also 40 hadith of Tawheed by Abu Ismail al-Harawi al-Hanbali. Ibn Salah, one of the first scholars to compile these types of books, has one of the most famous books in hadith sciences called Al-Muqaddimah, the introduction. And pretty much all later books that come out in hadith sciences go back to his book. He first started having sittings, gatherings where, now why he's mentioning this is how the concept of Imam an-Nawawi to compile his 40 came about. So after these gatherings, he would explain hadiths. And this is where the idea of explaining these comprehensive hadiths began. He reached up to 26 hadiths with their explanation, and then Imam an-Nawawi came and picked up his work. Imam an-Nawawi used the 26 that was explained by Ibn Salah and then added until he finished compiling 42 hadiths, which are today famously known as Al-Arba'un an-Nawawiyya, or Imam an-Nawawi's 40 hadiths. So it started through his teacher Ibn Salah, one of the greatest muhaddithin rahimahullah, who wanted a compilation of 40 but in ahadith which were comprehensive. In Imam an-Nawawi, he's going to state as well that he wanted to seek the ahadith which are equal to a third of Islam or all of Islam. So that's what makes his arba'in, his 40, different to what came before. So Ibn Salah rahimahullah started the work, but he stopped at 26. Then Imam an-Nawawi continued until he reached 42, which is known as the 40 hadith that we have before us today of Imam an-Nawawi. As for his criteria in compiling his collection, we notice from the previous section that the Imams whom I quoted, the names of their works compiled 40 in one topic. As for Imam an-Nawawi, he sought to use hadiths that were comprehensive and cover all areas of religion. He also didn't quote their chains so that they can be memorized easily. And he made sure that they would be at least maqbool, acceptable, if not completely authentic. So this is the first criteria of him, that he wanted those that, as we said, encompassed a great portion of the deen. Not only that, he wanted to seek those which were acceptable by the muhaddithin. And not only that, he didn't mention all of the chain, rather he sufficed with the sahabi, who is known as al-rawi al-a'la, the highest narrator. So a benefit from the 40 hadith is getting the talib al-ilm acquainted with the sahaba, getting him acquainted with the sahaba, as we're going to do when we explain each of the hadith. And with regards to the last point of it being maqbool, this is important because we should always know that what the source of our information is, whether the hadith is reliable, not reliable, or if it is sahih, or if it is hasan, or if it is da'if, and how this relates to whether a hadith is acceptable. When it comes to using weak hadiths, there is a very important and well-known difference of opinion, and we already mentioned this. So whoever likes, they can go and refer back to when we talked about it in the lessons of Mustalah al-Hadith or Manzumat al-Baykuni. As for the methodology that we're going to use in explaining these 40 hadith, it will be as follows. So we'll present the matan, the text of the hadith, with its number, grade and reference. So that's pertaining to the text. Then we will give a brief biography of the narrator of the hadith, so the sahabi. And this is in order for the student to get acquainted with the sahaba. Then we will elaborate on terms using the hadith to help the student develop a sound understanding of the hadith. So this is what's known as gharibul hadith, especially with certain words which can have more than one meaning or they're not commonly used. Such as, for example, in certain narrations, tuba. Tuba can have many meanings which are all valid, such as a tree in Jannah, such as a level in Jannah, and so forth. All of these are valid. So when we start to explain the hadith, wherever this is necessary, we will do so with certain words using that hadith. Then we'll present a summarized explanation of the hadith, which will also be a concise one. And we will highlight any interesting facts associated with it as well. So we'll give a concise but yet detailed explanation of the hadith. And wherever we can see that there's extra benefit to be added, we'll allude to that by saying interesting fact or so forth, in order to elaborate on what needs to be elaborated on. Then we'll quote what classical scholars have said concerning the status of the hadith in Islam. And why I've done this is to show and highlight the purpose of Imam an-Nawawi rahimahullah as to why he compiled the 40 hadith. We said that his goal was to compile 40 hadith which are equal to a third of Islam or all of Islam. And we'll see from these scholarly statements how this is highlighted and how they revered these ahadith in this manner. We'll also present derived principles from the hadith in order to present the student with how this hadith can be applied. So these principles could be in multiple sciences, whether it be in maxims pertaining to fiqh, whether it be principles in everyday life, whether it be principles in aqeedah, whether it be principles in asceticism. We'll see how this hadith can be applied in our everyday life. Then we'll present the benefits which are derived from the hadith. And finally, we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the mighty and wise, to make this solely for Him, and that He also makes it a source of benefit for everyone who gains access to it. May His peace and blessings be upon the final Prophet, Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wasallam. And through that we've ended the first lesson, which is an introduction into the 40 hadith. But quickly we can read, before we get to the explanation of hadith number 1, what Imam an-Nawawi said pertaining to his introduction to the book. So he says, rahmatullah alayhi, Imam an-Nawawi, in his introduction to this great work, he says, praise is due to Allah, Lord of the worlds, sustainer of the heavens and the earths, director of all created beings, sender of messengers. May Allah's praises and peace be upon them all. To responsible beings, in order to guide them and clarify the ways of religion by means of decisive evidences and clear proofs. I praise Him for all His favours and ask Him for an excess of His bounty and generosity. I testify that there is no deity but Allah alone, there being no associate with Him, the One, the Prevailing, the Generous, the Perpetual Forgiver. And I testify that our Master Muhammad is His servant and messenger, His beloved and His pure friend, the best of creatures, the one honoured through the mighty Quran, the continuing miracle over the succession of years, and through sunnahs that enlighten those seeking right guidance, distinguished for comprehensive speech and ease in religion. May the blessings and peace of Allah be upon him and upon all the prophets and messengers, their families and all righteous people. To proceed, it has been related to us from Ali ibn Abi Talib, Abdullah ibn Mas'ud, Mu'adh ibn Jabal, Abu Darda, Ibn Umar, Ibn Abbas, Anas ibn Malik, Abu Hurairah, and Abu Sa'id al-Khudri radiyallahu anhum, through numerous chains with varied narrations, that the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alayhi wasallam said, whoever preserves for my nation 40 hadiths concerning its religion, Allah will resurrect him on the day of resurrection among the jurists and scholars. In one narration it says, Allah will resurrect him as a jurist and a scholar. And in that of Abu Darda, I will be for him, meaning in his narration, I will be for him on the day of resurrection an intercessor and a witness. In the narration of Ibn Mas'ud it says, he will be told, enter by one of the doors of paradise you wish. And in that of Ibn Umar, he will be registered among the scholars and resurrected among the martyrs. But hadith scholars have agreed that it is a weak hadith despite its many narrations. The scholars have compiled within this context countless collections. The first one I have known to do so was Abdullah ibn Mubarak, and then Ibn Aslam al-Tusi, the nurturing scholar, then Al-Hasan ibn Sufyan al-Nasa'i, Abu Bakr al-Ajurri, Abu Bakr Muhammad ibn Ibrahim al-Asfahani, Al-Daraqutni, Al-Hakim, Abu Nu'aym, Abu Abdul Rahman al-Sulami, Abu Sa'id al-Malini, Abu Uthman al-Sabuni, Abdullah ibn Muhammad al-Ansari, Abu Bakr al-Bayhaqi, and innumerable others from among both previous and later ones. And I have made istikhara to Allah, the Exalted, concerning the collecting of 40 hadiths, following the example of those well-known Imams and preservers of Islam. For the scholars have agreed upon the permissibility of acting on a weak hadith in regard to virtuous deeds. But in spite of this, my reliance is not upon that hadith, but rather on his sallallahu alaihi wasallam statement among the authentic hadiths. Let the one present among you convey to the absent. And he's saying, may Allah make radiant the face of a person who heard my statement and grasped it and passed it on as he heard it. Then there were some scholars who collected 40 hadiths on the fundamentals of the religion, whilst others did so on the derived matters, others on jihad, others on asceticism, others on conduct, others on speeches, and all of them are sound objectives. May Allah be pleased with those who intended them. But I have considered collecting 40 more important than all of those. And subhanAllah, just as a side note, he's not saying this out of boastfulness, but he's saying this out of confidence, and there is no problem in this, in doing so in our Sharia. And they would be 40 hadiths inclusive of all of that. And each hadith would be a great precept from those of the religion. One that scholars have described as having Islam revolve around it, or half of Islam, or a third of it, and the like. Furthermore, I would commit myself regarding these 40 to their being authentic. And most of them are found within the two Sahihs of Bukhari and Muslim. I cite them with the chains of narration removed in order to make their memorization easy and their benefit widespread. Insha'Allah ta'ala, I then sum them up with a section defining their more obscure wordings. Everyone desiring the hereafter ought to know these hadiths for what they contain of important information, and because they alert one to all acts of obedience to Allah, which is clear to whoever reflects upon it. Upon Allah is my dependence, and upon Him is my relegation and support. To Him belongs all praise and favor, and from Him is all success and protection. And next week, bi'idhnillah, we start with the first hadith. Wallahu ta'ala a'lam wa ahkam. Wa sallallahu wa sallam ala nabiyyina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam.